edge of Isvalir's reach, where the western peaks marked Havenshire's fading crown. The wind carried with it the scent of ancient snowfields and pine long dormant. Elaris rode with her cloak drawn tight, the thin rays of sun offering little warmth beneath the wide sky. The crown post of Isvalir had long since faded behind them. Ahead stretched the Hremark, barren, frost-hardened plains, where the banners flew thinner and southern loyalty wore a much colder face. Beside her, Astara rode in silence, the hilt of her curved blade visible above her shoulder. Unlike the royal guards who had once flanked Elaris in court processions, the warriors of Astara's company wore no gleaming steel. They bore scars instead of sigils, faded cloaks, mismatched mail, and leathers patched with fur and frost. Survivors, not soldiers. One was marked with a jagged scar across his jaw, the other bearing a hunter's longbow, his breath calm as the laying frost. The third, a female cloaked in fur, moved with the quiet command of one who had seen too many nights end in blood. No one spoke unless necessary. The road ahead was not one for idle talk. It was mid-morning when the quiet cracked. Voices, harsh and laughing, echoed from beyond a rise in the path. Elaris slowed her mount. Astara raised a hand, signaling a halt. The sound was wrong, mocking, sharp. They crested the ridge to see a caravan at the base of the slope. 3 wooden wagons halted in the snow. Around them stood a band of figures bearing southern tabards, their steel armor polished bright. One held a spear across his shoulders like a banner of leisure. Another was overturning sacks from the rear of a wagon, scattering dried grain into the wind. The caravanners were northern, their clothing rugged and threadbare, with hunger in their eyes and silence on their lips. One of them, older and weather-etched, stood with arms outstretched to shield a younger kin as a soldier tore through their belongings. A child clung to the younger's side, silent and still. Then one of the soldiers struck the guardian with the butt of his spear. He fell sideways into the snow, groaning. Astara moved immediately. Elaris followed, her voice not yet raised but her blood rising. The southern elves didn't turn until they were almost upon them.
"Well,"
one of the soldiers muttered, flicking his braid over his shoulder.
"The wind's been generous, sending so many drift folk down to grace our roads."
Astara dismounted before her horse had stopped moving.
"You're interfering with free passage under royal decree,"
she said flatly.
"Royal decree?"
The spearholder laughed.
"In the north. That parchment won't warm your bones come nightfall."
Elaris swung down beside her. As her boots touched frost-hardened earth, the hood of her cloak slipped back, catching the wind. Sunlight struck her hair, pale and gold-woven, unmistakably southern. One of the soldiers narrowed his eyes and cocked his head. The smirk came slowly.
"Ah, another light-touched stray, stooping to drift among the frostborn. Careful. The north stains whatever it touches."
One of Astara's warriors stepped forward, her fingers tightening around the haft of her axe. Astara lifted a hand to stop her. But Elaris was already moving. She advanced without a word, placing herself between the two groups. Then she spoke, clear and sharp.
"Your names, now!"
The smirks faltered. The spearholder blinked, then stepped forward, his chest rising as if to remind them whose crest he bore.
"Excuse me?"
Elaris stepped closer. Her voice was level and unwavering.
"You strike unarmed travelers within Isvalir's protected domain and rob them under false pretense. Give me your names so I may record them properly in the charges I will send back to the Rietzaler."
One soldier let out a rough, uncertain laugh. Another shifted his weight.
"And who are you to think the Hall of Writings would stain its scrolls with the words of a drifter?"
he said. Elaris drew herself up.
"I am Princess Elaris, daughter of Kavrin, bearer of the throne and will of Isvalir."
A heartbeat of silence. The wind caught the edge of her cloak, and her shoulder clasp gleamed, tarnished silver, shaped in the ancient crest of the elder seat. Recognition struck them like a silent blow. The emblem of the high blood, the true line. The soldiers stiffened, their oaths thrumming faint and furious in their veins. One opened his mouth, thought better, and closed it again. The frost-bound air between them seemed to tighten, brittle as glass. The spearholder shifted his stance, as if remembering how to breathe.
"We were not made aware,"
he said, his voice unsettled.
You should be aware of your place.
Astara snapped, stepping forward now. Elaris did not move.
You will help the caravanners return what you've scattered, and you will offer them apology. Then you will return to your outpost and await summons.
One of the younger guards muttered, his voice rough with cold and shame.
We thought they carried contraband. We acted under caution.
You thought wrong,
Elaris said, her tone cold as the frost beneath them.
This is not some fractured borderland. You answer to Isvalir, and you answer to me.
Slowly the soldiers began to obey. One knelt in the snow, righting the sacks. Another helped the older elf to his feet, eyes averted. The caravanners said nothing, watching with the wary disbelief of those who had never been defended before. As the soldiers mounted and turned to leave, one muttered under his breath,
"Things have changed if princesses have begun to break bread with northern scum."
Elaris caught the words.
No, but things are about to.
They rode in silence for a while. Behind them, the caravanners faded, slowly swallowed by the wide, endless grey of emptiness. It was Astara who broke the quiet.
I've seen hunger starve loyalty, cold turn kin against kin. But I've never seen one of your kind stop a blade that wasn't meant for them.
Elaris kept her eyes on the path ahead.
Then perhaps I was born in the wrong half of the realm.
Astara gave a faint smile, a quiet hope that perhaps it was not too late to mend what was already breaking. The screams sharpened as Zahirah neared the square, cutting through the thick night air like jagged blades. The streets he knew so well, the winding alleys, the sun-cracked stones, were scattered with the bodies of guards, their blood pooling dark against the sand. Some had fallen with weapons still clenched in hand, others had not been so lucky. There had been no battle, only a massacre. Zahirah pressed on, each step heavier than the last, until at last he reached the city's heart. The great plaza was a ruin of overturned carts, shattered pottery, and the huddled forms of jinn too broken by fear to move. The torches around the sunfire pit flared high, their flames casting wild, writhing shadows across the scene. The few remaining guards hung from hastily built gibbets, their corpses blackening in the firelight. At the center of it all, on the raised steps of a sandstone structure, stood Orinai. Gone was the shrewd merchant cloaked in dust and coin. In his place was a figure wrapped in dark silks with a blood-red sash draped across his chest. In one hand he held the Narite blade, the weapon catching the torchlight in a deadly shimmer. Orinai raised the sword high, and the plaza fell silent.
Al-Haddar!
His voice rang out, sharpened by rage and triumph.
Your time of weakness is over. No longer will we scavenge the ruins of our ancestors. No longer will we serve fools who dress weakness in the robes of tradition.
The jinn did not answer. They watched, cowed and silent, as Orinai's retinue stalked the edges of the crowd, their blades drawn, daring anyone to move. Orinai paced the steps, the Narite blade catching firelight as he turned.
But there is one among you,
he said, voice thick with disdain,
who has been hiding the means of our salvation. One who thinks he shapes the future with the hands of the past, yet dares not wield it.
He lifted the blade, pointing into the crowd.
Zahirah, step forward, Zul-Hadid, or I'll start carving your guilt into their flesh.
A hush fell over the square. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, Zahirah's name falling from trembling lips. He could turn now, fade into the alleys, let this all burn behind him. But even before the thought fully formed, he knew he wouldn't. Zahirah stepped forward. The crowd parted around him like smoke.
There he is,
Orinai said, smiling without warmth.
The great forger of Al-Haddar.
Zahirah stood tall, though the weight of flame and 1,000 eyes pressed down on him.
You know why I've summoned you,
Orinai said, his voice dipping low.
You have Narite. You forged this weapon, and you will give me all the rest.
Zahirah met his gaze.
There is no rest,
he said, voice calm but cold.
That was the only blade.
A ripple of disbelief stirred the onlookers. Orinai tilted his head, mock curiosity playing across his face.
Only one?
He echoed, tilting his head.
You must take me for a fool and insult your fellow djinn. A crafter such as yourself doesn't stop at one. You hoard and you lie.
Zahirah said nothing. His silence was its own defiance. Orinai's smile thinned to a knife's edge.
No matter. If you will not give, then you will serve.
He turned to the crowd, his voice rising like a blade drawn across the neck.
You will leave Al-Haddar tonight. You will find more Narite, mine it, steal it, tear it from the bones of the earth. I care not. And you will bring it back. Otherwise, I'll burn this city down one life at a time.
Zahirah's fists curled, but still he said nothing. Orinai turned, snapping his fingers once. From the shadows, 2 djinn dragged forth a broken form and hurled him at the base of the steps. Mubashir. His robes were torn, one sleeve soaked in blood. His face was bruised, his arm broken at a grotesque angle. Yet even now his eyes, bright and defiant, met Zahirah's without flinching. Orinai did not hesitate. He grabbed Mubashir by the hair, yanked him upright, and drove the Narite blade into his neck in a brutal sideways thrust. The old djinn gasped, a short, sharp sound, and crumpled as the blade tore free. Blood sprayed across the sandstone steps, hissing where it touched the fire-warmed stone. The square fell still, even the flames seemed to recoil. Zahirah could not speak. His rage surged like molten metal, but he kept it buried, locked behind clenched teeth. Orinai wiped the blade clean on Mubashir's bloodied robe, with slow, deliberate motions. Then he turned back to Zahirah.
Go. Find more Narite. Bring it back, or I'll spill a throat for every day you waste. And make no mistake, when there are none left but ashes, I will find you, and you will wish you had died with them.
He leaned closer, his voice a venomous whisper.
Run. Run before I decide your usefulness has ended.
Zahirah's jaw was tight enough to crack. He could taste blood in his mouth from where he had bitten down to keep from breaking. He turned from the steps, from the bloodied plaza, from the broken bodies of a kind who once commanded flame, but now could not summon a spark to save themselves. He walked into the dark, carrying with him the final embers of a life shattered in flame, and in his chest something black and fierce began to burn. The candles in the Countess's private quarters burned low in their sconces, casting elongated shadows across the polished floor. The air was heavy with wormwood and smoked birch, the scent so thick it clung to the lungs. Vasilika adjusted the final clasp of her gown with deft fingers, then shifted the jet-black crown atop her brow. The mirror before her had fogged slightly from the cold, just enough to blur her reflection, but not enough to conceal the weariness beneath her eyes. She despised these gatherings. The high-born Strigoi would arrive cloaked in pageantry, gilded masks veiling lifeless faces, rosaries etched with the names of ancestors long decayed. Their finery shimmered, but the titles they carried had long since outlived their meaning, draped on brittle bones like heirlooms of a forgotten empire. They would toast to preservation as the bones of Umbrasaur hollowed beneath velvet and stone. But appearances must be kept. One does not govern Umbrasaur from behind closed doors. A knock stirred the silence, followed by her handmaiden's voice, measured and formal, just as it had been taught.
Countess, they await you in the hall of Vesperi.
She exhaled once, quietly.
Let them wait.
Moments later, she began down the corridor toward the grand hall. From beyond the vaulted archway came the slow sweep of a harp and the chiming laughter of those who had never known desperation. The stained-glass windows along the hall had long since faded, visages of the Sfatul Albiri and ancestral martyrs blurred into smudged glass and broken shadow. Her steps echoed softly across the inlaid stone, the hush of her approach swallowed by the growing hum of revelry. The hall of Vesperi unfurled before her like a tapestry of light and glass. Chandeliers of tarnished copper swayed gently above a sea of polished mosaic tile. Clusters of Strigoi nobles drifted through the hall like slow-turning constellations, drawn together by ambition and the unspoken gravities of old alliances. Their goblets glittered with pride, their voices lacquered with poison, each exchange a performance veiled in tradition and sharpened by bloodline. Vasilika moved like smoke between them, a word to this Vel, a gesture to that Domn. All of it smooth, practiced, and grimly necessary. Let them believe she was invested in their revels. Let them laugh at ancient covens, and boast of whose lineage reached furthest into the grave. None of it held weight beyond the hour. Domnitsa Nestra of the Drashkov bloodline raised a gemmed goblet in greeting.
Countess, your absence nearly dulled the wine.
Then perhaps you should drink faster,
Vasilika replied smoothly. Chuckles rippled across the chamber. A masked Paharnik in a bone-thread doublet leaned closer.
Tell us, Countess, when will the cathedral reopen? I do so miss the sermons of our more devout clergy.
Mockery, theatre, they wore their cruelty like perfume. Before she could answer, the chamber doors shuddered. A violent echo split the music. One of the hinges shrieked. And then the doors burst open. Corvan stood framed by moonlight and frost, his coat trailing dust and ruin. His presence was a jagged blade in the room's silk-draped civility. Gasps flared across the crowd. Whispers followed. The musicians lowered their instruments. Several guards moved toward him, but Vasilika raised a gloved hand, halting them. Her voice, composed but firm.
Stop. Hello, Corvan.
Corvan's boots struck the marble like punctuation. He came to a stop halfway to the central dais, his eyes sweeping the crowd with open disdain before landing on her.
"Countess,"
he said, voice-edged,
"we need to speak."
This is not the hour for private audiences,
Vasilika replied, her tone even.
Nor the hall in which to hold them.
"Ceremony won't shield you from what's coming,"
Corvan said, his voice low.
"And no pane of colored glass will keep the coming dark from pouring in."
Someone laughed mockingly.
"Oh, how theatrical."
Corvan's gaze flicked toward them.
"Then keep drinking. With luck, you won't notice when everything starts to fall."
A boyar, laced in crimson from throat to boot, raised his goblet lazily.
Perhaps your apocalyptic visions are meant for the beggars outside the gate. We've endured worse in Umbrasaur. Let the peasants worry.
Corvan turned sharply.
"They will be the first to fall, but not the last. When the collapse happens, there won't be peasants and nobles, only the buried and the devoured."
Laughter rippled through the room. Uneasy this time, an elder voice rang out, low, contemptuous.
"You dare preach fate to us? Do you fashion yourself a prophet now, scavenger?"
"No,"
Corvan said quietly.
"But I know something stirs at the edge of the darkness. And I'm telling you now, Moros won't save you when the world is torn asunder. There will be no death to collect you, only the silence that follows."
The room quieted at once. That name pressed down like a burial stone. Even jesters left it untouched. A crack echoed behind him, a mirror fractured in a clean vertical line. Somewhere in the ballroom, a candle extinguished with no wind. A servant coughed into their goblet and stared as the wine had turned black. That was when Vasilika stepped forward, her eyes searching his face. Her instincts pulled at her, telling her to believe him. But around her, the court watched with eager, predatory gazes. They waited to see if she would falter. A countess could not bend to a madman in public, not here, not now.
Corvan,
she said, voice clear as cut glass.
This is neither the time nor the place.
He opened his mouth to protest, but she raised her hand again. And this time, she did not stop the guards. Two approached him. He didn't resist. As they seized his arms, he said only,
I know you felt it. In your bones, in your blood. The stillness right before the scream.
He was forced back toward the doors, his boots scuffing the black stone. Vasilika turned away before he was gone. She raised her goblet, forced a slight smile, and nodded to the harpist to begin again. But the mirror remained cracked, and outside the sanctum, above the towers, a sudden gust extinguished a dozen torches at once.